Hi, I'm Steve, and this is BlandManStudios, where I make creative stuff and talk about the technology behind it. In this video, which is called Scripting in Blender is Easy, I'm going to tell the quick story about how I taught myself scripting in Blender in an hour or two. I already know a lot of Blender and a lot of Python, and I wanted to put my skills to the test to see if I could put those things together and plot some map stuff using Python in Blender in however long it takes, just to see how easy it is to learn skills and tools. So I'm going to run through what I built and the quick bit about how I quickly learned to be able to build this kind of stuff, and hopefully that convinces you that scripting in Blender is easy and maybe makes you want to learn a little bit of it for yourself. So let's get into the story. First, on my laptop here, I use Blender installed via Steam, just because I think that is a very easy way to have Blender always updating itself. And so I was basically doing a couple geospatial experiments where I was like, let me just download some files or use some geospatial tools. So I used this Blender GIS plugin that there's a tutorial online for to kind of like plot this map of Denver, because I think it's kind of cool the way the mountains just come out of nowhere. So that was kind of cool getting to see somebody else's plugin and what they were using. But really the test that I wanted to put myself to is like, wouldn't it be cool if I could just take any kind of map data, pull it into Blender, and use that to start making art? So let's see if the first experiment I did was probably just, I was trying to make a plane and put some map stuff on it, and I really couldn't figure out how to make the textures work, so that's pretty much just a failed experiment. And the more interesting experiment that I did was practicing with Python scripting. So as you can see here, I was able to put together this kind of racetrack looking set of cubes. And the way I did that was not by manually placing cubes, all these cubes in their places, but you can see it's pretty easy to manipulate them now that they are instantiated in the world. But the way that I did this was by downloading a map online and using Blender scripting to get it working. So basically, when I started this kind of journey, I was like, let me just go online and try and find some interesting maps. So I know of a couple of mapping utilities and things, so I just went to OpenStreetMap because that's kind of like a very helpful and interesting kind of like, open source project that has a lot of good map data in it. So I just searched for Denver, and like it can take you to the Denver area. One of the things that I tried was basically stealing the map tiles that the network requests do here. So you can see as I do like moving around, there's actually tiles being generated. And so you can kind of take these URLs and paste them into your browser, and just you get the images that the web browser is using. You can do this for any of the layers that you add on. So you can kind of just say like, oh, actually, I'm interested in this standard layers, and see it does a bunch of web requests for the different tiles that make up this layer. You can copy the URL and you can just paste it in here. So that was idea number one, was basically I wanted to just like download some of these tiles and see if I could put them onto a Blender file and kind of like use them in a piece of art. So that's why I came up with this, where I was like trying to figure out how to map that image onto this plane, because that would be interesting. Then I realized there's a Blender GIS plugin that just does that automatically for you, and also like it allows you to import base maps. There's this whole like navigate through the world UI that I learned to use from a YouTube video that I saw that I can show you here. Really cool stuff that you can like import the elevation data, which is how that like map just came automatically. With the elevation, you can like tab into edit mode and you can like displace a whole chunk of the map. So it just shows like once you import stuff using that plugin, it's like then becomes fairly native Blender. But I didn't want to use other people's tools. I wanted to experiment with maps and get something working myself. So I started poking around for other kinds of data that I could import. So not just these map tiles, which would be easy to steal, but I thought GPS traces, that could be interesting. So this was a little while ago, so I can't remember exactly which one of these I downloaded. It's not super important to find the exact one, but basically what you can do is you can see that each of these is a GPX file that you can download. So this one has all these different pieces of this racetrack, so I can just go ahead and download that, and you can see, let's see, this one is in Italy somewhere. So what you do is you end up with this file. You can open it up in some sort of mapping utility and it'll show you where the map exists, but also I can edit it with kind of a text editor, and you can see it's actually just an XML file, and each of these has there's like a whole array of points. Each one has a latitude, a longitude, an elevation, and a time. So clearly this is some kind of GPS trace from somebody driving around in a loop in Italy. So, and it has like all of the geographic data that we'd need to be able to plot this in Blender. So I'll go ahead and close that, and I'll show you how I got started with Blender basically. So I have this file open, but just from scratch what I did was I opened a new general file, and this obviously gives you a default cube, and I started looking up a scripting tutorial. So I did not discover this scripting tab on my own. I'll go ahead and see what I can find. So it's like Blender scripting tutorial. Quick start from the Blender Python API, which basically says, hey, before you get started, you need some examples, and there's some instructions in here. Two most common ways of executing Python scripts are in the built-in text editor or by entering commands in the Python console. So let's see. Yeah, there's a scripting tab in there by default. So basically reading through some of this tutorial was able to get me a lot of the things that I needed to get started. So I kind of believe that every time I'm learning programming, I need both a goal and a set of resources. So today's goal is just kind of get something geospatial or something map related imported into Blender. And I have now this tutorial that kind of can help me get started with some of the basics. So once you have a default workspace and you found this scripting tab, I like to just kind of reorder this by moving it to the front, and then reorder this by moving to the front. And now I have a scripting layer and a layout layer, so you can really easily see and view what's going on in the viewport in this tab. And then the scripting tab is where you can get started with scripting. So that tutorial explains that you basically have a text editor panel here where you can create a new Python file. I'm going to call it like test example.py. And then you can see it saved it somewhere. And then you can start to like run Python code here. You can say like print hello. And that's where you can run it. And then you also have this interactive Python console over here in case you're like trying to get to know Python commands. You can say like print hello, and it prints out hello. One of the first things I did was I kind of wanted to know where is the current working directory of this kind of like interactive environment. Where are the files that it can find? So I know that there's a Python command for get the current working directory. So I know it's within the OS library, so I'm going to import OS. And then I thought it was like os.pwd for print working directory, because that's the Linux command. But then, as usually with programming, you just Google what the thing is. So it's like Python how to get current directory. And sure enough, it pulls up a Stack Overflow answer. And it reminded me that, oh yeah, there's an os.cwd, get cwd command. So that's what I was trying to remember. So I go os.get cwd. So now I have a place where I'm very confident that I can execute Python code and start to get understanding of the Python utilities, especially the ones that it's going to start recommending here in this tutorial as I read through it. But the other thing was I wanted to be able to not just run things interactively, but kind of run a script, save my work, and iterate on it and make it better. So I wanted to be able to run things from this tab, but as you can see here, I don't actually see this print hello getting printed. So I was like, if I'm gonna be able to write scripts, I'm gonna need to be able to print what's happening in them so I can figure out what's happening. Makes it a lot easier to debug my code. So after Googling around a little bit, I realized, let's see. First, I came across a Stack Overflow answer, which where somebody says they wrote this complicated print function. I tried it, it didn't work, it was failing for me for some reason, and then eventually Blender script print console. Where does the console output go? I found a different Stack Exchange answer where somebody was saying that you can, if you're in Windows, you can do like there's a window toggle system console. So you can say window, and if you're on a different operating system, I'm on Linux, there should be like a toggle console page, which brings your console up for you. But then I also learned that if you launch Blender from the command line, if you have another OS, just start Blender from the terminal. So what I did here was I just, instead of opening it through Steam, I just asked Steam basically, where is Blender installed to? And it can show me installed files, browse. And it shows me that basically all these Blender files, and this one is the one that it uses to launch Blender, is stored in this common apps folder. So I can just go into terminal and I can say, let's go ahead and change directory into that directory. So I'm gonna say home folder / local share Steam apps common Blender, and I'm using tab completion here to make my life a lot easier. So as you can see here, now we don't have Blender open, we don't have Steam open, but I can see that this Blender executable is right here in this folder. So I can just say run Blender, the /, and you can see it opened up Blender, and I get this nice terminal output here. So if we do, again, open up the scripting tab and run a script here, where we can say like print hello, I can go ahead and run that, and you can see the output is printed here. So it's kind of like confirmation for me that I can now start to write Python code, save it, have it execute, and get to see that it is in fact working and doing what I want it to do. So from there, I'm like, okay, I'm confident in my ability to write some code in Blender. Let's get started on importing this geospatial data and get started with processing it. Because I have this belief where there's basically 3 levels of understanding a programming language. The first is if you can write hello world and do simple things like printing and if statements and for loops. And then the second level of understanding a programming language is when you get to the confidence that you're like, I can do pretty much anything that I want to do as long as I have enough documentation and I have this now self-serve ability to go find resources, and I'm confident I could figure out anything I'd want to figure out. And then the third level is if you can write code in that language that is so good that it would execute, or that it would impress anybody who's an expert in that programming language. I'm obviously not going to try and get to that level in my first 2 hours of Blender, but I'd like to be able to see how quickly I can get over that hump of those first 2 levels and get to the point where I'm like, yeah, I could do anything I want to do. So let's exercise that autonomy here by trying to import that geospatial data file into Blender. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this by opening up, let's not save that, let's open up this experimental space here where I've already imported this one racetrack. And to just show you basically walking through how I started scripting this out. So you can see the first thing I did was I wrote I imported the library import OS, and I did this like get current working directory function. So I can do, let's see, import sys.exit. So this is Blender for let's quit, or this is Python for let's just quit here. So this will allow me to execute just these first two pieces of code, these first couple lines of code. Oh, it exited all of Blender. That's a mistake. My bad. Let's see. Not what I intended to do. Yeah, because this is executing as the Python that Blender is a part of. So that Blender is running inside. So won't do that one again. But I can do an alternative, which is just use, let's see, command/ to comment everything out. Nope, can't do that. What I can do is I can do a new script. So let's go ahead and make a new script here and just run the first couple things. So as you can see here, let's go ahead and control copy. Delete that one. Yes. Okay. Control V. No. Control copy. And Control V. Perfect. Okay. So here I've just got this OS. I'm importing the OS library and I'm running that get current working directory. And you can see, yes, it ran successfully. And if I tab back over to my terminal, I can see it printed out the working directory. So the same place where we started running Blender. Other things that I started to do in here was I thought, okay, let me first just open up that GPX file and start writing it. So this is a common thing if you're learning Python where you say like how to open a file in Python. There's a bunch of tutorials, but they pretty much all have this same thing of, let's see, where's the with statement? The with statement is the better way to do it. Yeah. Nope. Yeah. With open file as readable, with open file with the readable option as file, and they start reading things from file. So you can see that's what I started to do was I was like, maybe I'll just read this and read all the lines from the file. But then I realized it's an XML file. So that GPX file looked like an XML file when I opened it up. So you can see here, this is the one I was working with. I can open it. It is in fact an XML looking file, kind of with this tree structure. And yes, I can open it with other maps utilities and it'll take me to an actual map representation of it, but I want to open it in Blender. So you can see we have basically what I thought was, okay, I'll just Google how to open, how to parse an XML file in Python. And I want the one Python parse XML. I'm going to want the one that's from the actual Python documentation because I kind of want to know the official way to parse Python, and it looks like it's actually really simple. You can just open up the file using this kind of like tree structure, then you can get the root, and then from there you can iterate through each of the items in the Python, in the XML tree. So that's exactly what I wrote. I basically just copy and pasted that, and then instead of using the path that they're recommending for their file here, I just gave the full absolute path of the GPX file that I wanted to open, and then I ran the same get root function, and then I printed it out. So if we just copy just these lines, we can run just these lines. We're not even using Blender Pi yet. So you can see I run those and it's printing out, oh cool, it has found the element in that file. So let's go ahead and open with XML. You can see here it found this element, which is the, maybe it's the GPX element. And it is the /11. I'm sure that's some identifier in here, but basically what we want to do is we want to find the pieces that are inside this and eventually get to this list of trace data, which has each of our T, R, K, P, T. points. So maybe those are track parts, but basically, oh, it's track point, yeah. So I just want to find each of these track points and get the lat longs. So again, copying what I saw right here in this library, they do for child in root, and then they print all the tags. So the next thing I did was I basically said, let me just take all of the, let's just print all the tags and attributes. And then you can see it didn't get that very far. It just got, there's a metadata piece and a track piece. So within this GPX, there is a metadata piece, and then there's a track piece. And so you can see XML has this like hierarchical, once something starts, it finishes, and the stuff that's in between is there. So that's how I know that this track is inside the GPX, because the GPX hasn't had a close GPX, which would look like /GPX, which I'm sure is down at the bottom of the file you can find. There it is. So you can see basically the track TRK is inside the GPX. So that's how I knew I wanted to go a little further deeper. So I'm like, okay, we can iterate through the children of this GPX, but I actually want to iterate through the children of this track. So just wrote a little bit more to say, okay, instead of for child in root, let's do for grandchild in child. So let's iterate through the pieces that are one step deeper. So here in our next script, you can see, let's go ahead and Control X. Okay, so I'm going to say, let's go ahead and print grandchild. And so now we're looping through hopefully every element within that track piece. So let's go ahead and see what executed. This time it found a name, description, extensions, and track seg, which is probably track segment. So now we have our track seg piece, and we want the track parts inside the track seg. So let me go ahead and just, I think what we want to do is we want to loop even deeper. And so that's what I did here, is basically if there's a track segment, let's loop deeper and get the trace within that one grandchild. So this is what I'm talking about, where if you know the basics of, if you know for ifs and maybe file openings, you know the basics of a programming language. So we have an if where we say if, and then if you see one where the grandchild tag is track seg, loop through that grandchild and print out the actual segment. So I can run that for you, and you can see here it's printed out the lat longs for each piece. I do remember debugging this at first, where I said something like, where I had this as, let's see, was it if, probably had if grandchild dot like equals track seg, and the way that worked is just nothing printed out. So it just prints only that top element. So just this print right here. And so to figure out what it actually needed to be, I think I ended up probably just looking at each grandchild and kind of seeing, okay, we're printing out the tag and the attribute. So when I print this way, I realized, oh, that's my bug, because we're printing out first is the tag, and then next is, let's see, yeah, this prints out first the tag and then the attributes. There's no attributes here, but the tag is track seg. And so that's why I wanted to just check if the tag, here I can see actually what it is I didn't need it to be equals. So that was the bug, was that shouldn't be equals, it should be in. So right here, this is a string, and it has all of these characters in it. It has these braces, it has track seg, and so I basically wanted to use this string operation that says if you see these collection of characters inside this tag, then go deeper. So you can see definitely here we do have those track seg pieces, even though we also have kind of the parents and the other pieces within it. So that's what got me to this point here, where I have the ability to print out each kind of point along the track. And then getting it into Blender is now a matter of learning the Blender Python utilities. So at first I thought, let me just add each of these points to an array. So that's why you can see I've created an array here, and I've appended each point to that array, and I've had like a lat long and a 0, thinking these will be x, y, z coordinates. And then I was starting to experiment with this mesh stuff down here, because the tutorial that I was following does have some stuff about mesh. So it like has stuff about adding meshes. So I was trying to see if I could get that working, but it seemed kind of complicated. So then I just thought to myself, okay, I'm just trying to get to the point where I can plot each of these things on the map to show that I really am parsing this data correctly and that it really does look like the map that I've downloaded. And just to show you that I'm also doing that, let me go ahead and, no, actually that's fine. I just want to get to the point where I'm plotting these. So instead I just kind of searched for Blender Python how to plot cubes. And I think this probably took me to Stack Overflow answer. I don't think it was this one. Oh, it was Blender Python add mesh to scene. Yeah, okay, so I was searching for how to add the mesh to the scene because I was trying this code right here to add the mesh, but it wasn't being added to my scene. It wasn't showing up the way these cubes show up here. So I just started searching for how to add it to a scene, and I ended up finding these functions here, which are the primitive add functions. Basically, you just give a location and a radius, and it will add the primitive to your map. So you just got to import Blender, and you got to add the cube. So I'll just show you what I did, because basically I got very familiar with just deleting a whole bunch of stuff. Let's say, nope, not duplicate objects. That might crash Blender. Delete and delete. Okay, cool. So with all the objects deleted, I wanted to make a bunch of objects and add them to my map. And so first I started out with just stealing that code right here to say import Python. Let's do import Blender Python BPY, and then let's steal this cube add function with a little copy paste. And then instead of using this x and y, let's use the lat and long. So you could see here when it was printing these attributes, these were attributes of lat and long. They look like strings, and this kind of looks like a dictionary. So that's why I'm going to use my Python knowledge to say trace.attrib and then use dictionary referencing to say lat. So let's say like lat equals, so that's what I think is going to be able to get just this, to say get this dictionary, which is the attribute, the attrib, and then within that get the lat, which will give me this number, and then also do the same thing for the long. And so I'll just go ahead and paste that. So it's like long and long. And I think that since these are surrounded by quotes, they're going to be strings. So I'm just going to go ahead and convert that to a float to actually get the mathematical point here, float. And you can see I'm storing them in these variables. And so I won't quite add them to the map yet, but I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. So let's go ahead and print the lat and the long, print those variables, and hopefully we should see, yep, it printed out numbers for each of these. So I'm pretty confident I've got each of the lat and longs printing and kind of like referenced in code here. So instead of adding each of these at x or 0, I'm just going to say at this lat and at this long, and then I'll put them at 0 so they're kind of like flush on the ground. Now I'm going to run this. This is going to add a ton of cubes to the map. It will freeze Python in Blender, but it won't freeze. I don't think it should freeze my whole computer. So I'm just going to go ahead and run that. Oh, we got an error already. What's my error? Cannot find the word radius, unrecognized. Radius. How did I solve this last time? Oh, yeah. I found out that this is actually a bug, that they shouldn't be using the radius here in the cube add function. It's actually called size. So I figured that out by searching for BPY to actually get the Blender Python documentation. So here in Blender Docs, you can have the see the variables that it's asking for. It's saying give us a location and give us a size. So that's how I knew that that's actually a bug right there. So let's go ahead and change that to size. Size equals 0.5, and now I can run that. It'll hang for a bit. And hopefully, oh yeah, okay, so I do see tons of cubes added to my scene, which is great, but the problem is they are all so small and so close to each other. And then if I try and use Blender's scale to scale them up, I just end up with these huge overlapping squares, which don't really help. But the cool thing is you can see it's taken the same shape, like when their center points are showing up, it's taken the same shape as the track on the map. So if I open this GPX file with a maps program, you can pretty much tell it's this funny shape with the square on the end, funny shape with the square on the end. So clearly we've correctly imported the data. We just need to get it formatted so it looks better in Blender. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all those again. Let's see, where did they go? There we go, there they are. So I'll just go ahead and delete all those and then import them again. The way I'm going to do this is make them much, much smaller, so that way when I scale up they're not so big and they'll spread out from each other. So instead of making the size 0.5, I'm going to make it 0.0001. So let's make them very small, and so they'll be very close together, but they'll also be very small. And you can see, boom, all the cubes are here. Let me go back to the layout view. I can highlight them. I can kind of see their anchor there, even though they're small enough. And then as I use the scale tool, which is just highlighting something and then pressing S and then dragging, you can see we now have our array of cubes in Blender. So basically, and then you can kind of manipulate them however you want in Blender. You can flip them around. Again, with the scale tool, you can grab a couple of them, use the grab tool, move them over here. If we had the map, maybe we could try overlaying them onto the map. But that was basically my experimenting in Blender with being able to write just a little bit of code and a little bit of kind of like Blender space manipulation tools to go from having no experience in scripting in Blender and writing code for Blender to kind of feeling like I could find any file on the internet, and as long as I could find a Python library that can parse that file or write a Python library that can parse that file, I can get it imported into Blender. So obviously, in my opinion, cubes isn't the best thing for a racetrack. Like, it might be cooler if this was actually some kind of like, let's see, file, let me do like, is there a way to add a new grease pencil? Like, oh yeah, it's object mode A for add? No. add. Okay, so I could do add a grease pencil object, and like there's a stroke object where you can start to draw. Let me see. Add grease pencil, stroke, scale, and then I can change this into draw mode, and I can start to, if it doesn't freeze on me, yeah, okay, now I can start to draw strokes. So maybe having this racetrack like auto imported as some kind of vector stroke would be kind of cool. You could like mess with the transparency or have it kind of move in 3D space the way these kind of like funny little squiggles are. So probably a lot of cool things if you wanted to take this racetrack or car or GPS trace or whatever it is and turn it into actual art. But at least a cool experiment for me that I could go from knowing nothing about scripting in Blender with a couple Google searches, a couple helpful tutorial and reference websites, to feeling like I could just find any kind of map on the internet and import it into Blender. So just to recap the things I used and learned here, I started out with this Blender Quick Start tutorial, read a good portion of it. I also read a little bit of the Python documentation for parsing Excel files, and then I also did think that the Blender API docs were pretty helpful to be able to catch that bug. So if you're new to programming, I hope this was like a helpful insight into what it's like to be a programmer and solve bugs and find new tools and get to learn how to use them. As you can see, I think reference documentations by the creators of utilities, like the Blender docs by the blender.org, the Python docs by python.org, and then the actual, this is the API docs from blender.org, are like the authoritative truth that I use for learning things. But then also just getting unstuck along the way and wanting to learn things quickly is very helpful to go to Stack Exchange and read other people's experiences and their tips for things, because a lot of times that's a quick way to get unstuck. Instead of spending forever trying to figure out how to parse, how to read what is being printed to the console, I just had to find this person that recommended, hey, start Blender from the terminal. And so that's why I start Blender from the terminal, and I get to see the data being printed from the terminal. So I'll probably go ahead and post this Blender Python file, because why not? And this script for those of you that want to try and recreate this stuff. But for those of you that watched, thank you for watching. I hope this helps you see either how easy it is to learn programming, how easy it is to learn Blender, or how flexible and interesting the tool is, because I think I'm a pretty big fan. But yeah, thanks for watching, and don't forget to stay bland.